Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat.
Resolves.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Well, howdy, partners. This is Jumbo. I promise I won't ever do that again. This is Jumbo Commander with a partner deck tech from Battlebond. We have Regna the Redeemer and Krav the Unredeemed. Let's start off with Krav. 4 and a black for a 3/3 legendary demon. It has partner with Regna. For a single black and sacrificing X creatures, notice that there's no tap there, so just black sacrifice X creatures. Target player draws X cards and gains X life. Put X +1/+1 counters on Krav the Unredeemed. Oh man, let's look at Regna. Regna the Redeemer is 5 and a white, expensive, for a 4/4 legendary angel with flying and partner with Krav the Unredeemed. Regna says at the beginning of each end step, if your team gained life this turn, create 2 1/1 white warrior creature tokens. So what would a deck with Krav and Regna at the helm look like? Well, the first thing that's really important is that they are partners. They're going to go great in the 99 together, and remember that they can both be in your command zone together. And because they're partners, they play really well together. Krav sacrifices cheap creatures, and Regna creates them when you gain life. Oh, and Krav also gains you life. So if we have both of these out on the battlefield, they'll continually just pump each other up as you sacrifice more creatures, grow Krav, gain life, gain more creatures, and so on and so forth. The problem is that Krav is 5 mana and Regna is 6 mana. So it's going to be really mana intensive to get them going together and playing off of each other. But one thing is that this is actually a really popular Orzhov strategy. Orzhov is great at generating creature tokens, it's great at gaining life, sacrificing things for value, and sacrificing to drain your opponent. This is a strategy that we've seen over and over again with tons of different Orzhov commanders, and Krav and Regna don't really add very much to the equation, but they go great in tons of other decks, and you're going to notice a lot of other popular Orzhov commanders in this deck. And I want to particularly pay attention to Krav, because I think that Krav is incredibly powerful. Once again, I have to stress the advantage of just having partners. Even if they're in your 99, they are great, so much better than we all expected. And so just remember, you get a huge advantage just by having 2 cards in your command zone. This means that this pair can actually go in the 99 of a deck led by Ravos and Tymna, or we can have Ravos and Tymna in this deck. Ravos is going to be good in this deck because we want to flood the board with tokens. That way we can cash them in for value or with our commander for more cards. That's great. And so Ravos making those tokens relevant is going to be really important. Tymna can also make those tokens relevant by sending them to their deaths or in to get attacks through, and then paying life in order to draw more cards. Drawing cards is going to be really key in this deck, and I'm super excited that Krav has draw cards directly on him. But I already mentioned one thing that could get in the way of building this deck really well, and that's that there are so many cards in Orzhov that gain us life and that put creatures onto the battlefield. I want to take a look at a few right away. Let's look at Benevolent Offering, From Under the Floorboards, Timely Reinforcements, and Spectral Reserves. All of these cards seem to do exactly what we want. They put creatures on the battlefield and they gain us life. Those synergize so well with our commanders, these feel like no-brainers. Except I want to take a step back and find out, do we really want to play these cards at all in Commander? See, we might be looking at these cards from the mindset, from the perspective of our commanders already being on the battlefield. And in that situation, it's great. We add more card draw with the creatures, we gain life so we can add even more creatures, like it feels really good. But what if we play these on curve? What if we're playing Spectral Reserves on turn 4? Well, that's definitely before we'll have any of our 5 or 6 CMC commanders online. Are we happy with 2 spirit creature tokens and 2 life? No, we shouldn't be. And so that's one thing we have to take into considerations. I want our cards to be playable without our commanders. And if they happen to gain us life, or if they support a token strategy, then I'm very happy to include them in this deck. And these cards don't make it in. I think I might run Benevolent Offering just because I really like the political aspect of it, and that's something that I personally like to have in my commander decks. But if you're just trying to build a good version of this deck, no, scrap them all. I think what we're looking for is cards that generate us the value that we need incidentally, not just Gear Hulk. It's great. It just comes in, nuke something, but then you also gain life, and that can trigger our commander. Twilight Prophet has us drawing cards. We like that, and gaining life every single turn. That's amazing. And also has Ascend in order to get there, and when we have a token strategy, we're very likely to have Ascend quickly. And so these two cards fit really well with our strategy. And then we come across something really interesting, Vraska's Contempt. This feels like it's right there on the edge. I don't know if I would normally play Vraska's Contempt. I like that it can exile a creature, Planeswalker at instant speed. I don't really think about the 2 life, but the 2 life could be something in this deck because our commander triggers at the end of each end step, so every time we can gain life on our opponent's turn is really strong. But is Vraska's Contempt that much better for that life gain, for that synergy, than just playing an Utter End, which literally exiles what we need exactly when we need it? Personally, I land on the side of running Utter End over Vraska's Contempt because I have a hard time imagining in my playgroup Regna staying on the battlefield very long at all. But that's why we build redundancy in our deck. There will be other mechanics in this deck that reward us for gaining life. There'll be other mechanics that reward us for putting creatures on the battlefield. So maybe Vraska's Contempt is a solid include in this deck. That's kind of the push and pull we have to play with here. So let's go ahead and look at a lot of the creatures we have. And there are so many ways to get tons of creatures onto the battlefield. Elenda the Dusk Rose is a perfect example of this strategy. And the reason why is because it synergizes so well with our commanders. But actually, that's not true. That's not how we should approach it. We should instead say it synergizes with the strategy that our commanders support, which is token making, sacrifice, life gain. And we can see how Elenda fits into that. As we sacrifice other creatures, Elenda grows. If we sacrifice Elenda, she puts out a bunch of creatures that then we can use for this engine as we keep going and going. And of course, she has lifelink, and all of her vampires she produces has lifelink, giving us this life gain strategy. So we can see that it isn't just how Elenda synergizes with the commander, which by the way, she does super, super well, but also she'll just be a cog in this entire machine of sacrificing and life gain. We can see how a similar card like Hangerback Walker could fit into this strategy, but now we see that it doesn't actually fit in as well as Elenda does. We kind of have the benchmark for one of the best enablers in the deck. Let's take a look at a few more token producers that I would be happy to have in my deck no matter what it is. Grave Titan, just love that it just pumps out creatures. Ophiomancer, great defensive card, but also gives you sacrifice fodder every single turn. And remember, our commanders can trigger on every single end step. Endrixar Master Breeder can just pump the battlefield with thralls, and if we have sacrifice outlets for them, we can just keep putting thralls on the battlefield and never lose our Endrixar. So you might have noticed that over the past 5 cards, I've shown off 5 different types of creature tokens. Now, if we want to have the most relevant creature token producers, then we're going to have to get all over the place. But if we want to make sure that our creature tokens are relevant, we could utilize tribal synergies to make sure that those tokens are not just throwaway fodder for our commander, but really threaten the table. Looking at Regna, we could go with tribal warriors because she produces warrior tokens. But if you really want to go warriors, Najeela the Blade Blossom is so cool. You should go ahead and check out my commander deck tech on her. She's awesome. And trust me, you're going to be limiting your deck if you only allow yourself to play Orzhov warriors. Well, soldiers are a great tribe in this. Captain of the Watch, Knight Captain of Eos, Cloud Goat Ranger, Darien King of Keldor. You could even go with the soldiers produced by Planeswalkers. Elspeth Sun's Champion is just such a great Planeswalker in white. But Elspeth Terrell also puts out soldiers and gains life. You can also go the Spirit route. I mentioned a few of those earlier. Midnight Haunting, Drog Skull Cavalry, Lingering Souls. Midnight Haunting is instant, so you can deploy it on their turn. It's pretty good. Drog Skull Cavalry is so overcosted, it's 7 mana, but it helps you gain life. Lingering Souls is really great value and great in so many other formats. Not really impactful enough in Commander. Maybe Spirit Bonds could work. And Spirit Spawns might work in this deck anyways. It's a cool enchantment. Whenever you play a creature, you can then add to the board with a spirit token and protect your creatures. Actually, that sounds great. We want protection for our commanders. They're so expensive to get out on the battlefield. Now, what this is again leading me towards is picking and choosing the best mechanics that work not just by producing creatures, because like Lingering Souls, it produces 4 creatures across multiple turns in the colors that we're in. That seems great. But I'm leaning towards Spirit Bonds because it gives me protection too, and lets me put out spirits over way more turns. It seems a little bit more flexible. And my last spirit synergy works best when you are not playing with spirits. Requiem Angel is solid because whenever a non-spirit creature you control dies, by the way, it doesn't say non-token, just non-spirit, pretty good, you put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. That does help this strategy of sacrificing creatures, and that could be a really great inclusion, but it does cost 6 mana to get going. Remember how I said that this deck is going to be filled with other Orzhov commanders because it synergizes so well with the color pair? Well, here's Teysa Orzhov Scion. Sacrifice 3 white creatures to remove target creature from the game. This is another enabler. We want to be able to weaponize the tokens that we put onto the battlefield, and Teysa does a great job. And then the second ability, whenever another black creature you control is put into a graveyard from play, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying into play. Wow, she is token creation on herself as well, creating redundant loops of tokens as we sacrifice them and then put more onto the battlefield. That's perfect. Teysa Envoy of Ghosts doesn't fit as well as Orzhov Scion, but it does still give us token creation. Yeah, that's pretty good. Of course, if we're talking about token creation and life gain, we need to mention Crested Sunmare, because, come on. And if we're making tokens, Anointed Procession is just a great inclusion, and Anointer Priest. Although, Anointer Priest seems pretty narrow to me, just giving you life when tokens enter the battlefield. If we really want to go heavy on the life gain, we could look at a card like Angelic Chorus. Or actually, there's tons of other life gain. Maybe Anointer Priest is another example of a card that feels really good, but I would never think of playing in a normal commander deck, so don't play it here. And so we're going to transition into life gain and life drain. And one thing we have to keep in our heads is, well, life gain isn't that good. It isn't really board impacting, and so we have to be really critical about what gains us life. The first thing I want to talk about are cards that synergize with the token creation. Soul's Attendant and Soul Warden can gain us life not only on our turns, but on our opponent's turns as well. If we ever get our commander going, they're going to be great because they're going to trigger on our opponent's creatures as well. But if we don't have enough life gain synergies in this deck, they're just going to gain us 10 or 15 life, and that's it. Now, one thing that I do want to talk about is that they're 1-drops. And one thing that is great in this deck is if we can have a 1-drop package. If we know we want Viscera Seer as a sacrifice outlet, we know we want Mother of Runes to protect our commanders, and we know we want Hangerback Walker to create a bunch of tokens later on in the game, well then we can create a 1 CMC package for Ranger of Eos. Ranger of Eos is one of my favorite cards. It's like a cheaper Muldrifter that tutors you up exactly what you need. This is great. Next, if we want to gain a lot of life, Sangromancer does a great job of that, giving us life whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, or whenever they discard a card. Just as I previously mentioned, it is important to be able to trigger life gain during each opponent's turn, because that's the magical Christmas land that allows Regna to give us warriors on every end step. Oh, and don't forget about the Crested Sunmare, Horsey's at the end of every end step too. And I guess if we want to go all in, Angelic Accord, giving us angels every single end step. Of course we can activate Krav on our opponent's turn, sacrificing creatures and gaining life, but we want redundancy in this area. Bond to the Glorified, Vampiric Rites, Disciple of Gristlebrand, Ghost Council of Orzhova. All of these will let us sacrifice a creature on our opponent's turn, or on our turn, whatever we want, for some amount of value. And if we're putting a bunch of little creatures on the battlefield that are easy to get rid of, then we will want to cash them in for value over and over and over again, controlling the board, gaining advantage, doing some awesome stuff. And we can always include some cards that really have powerful effects when we do sacrifice them. Kakusho the Evening Star is just one example of a card that's powerful enough to play on its own, something I like having in Commander games, but really synergizes well, because if he ever dies, he's going to drain your opponents and gain you a bunch of life, and we'll find a good time to sacrifice him to do a ton of damage. Aili the Eternal Pilgrim is another Orzhov commander that just so easily slots into this deck. A legendary core cleric, and then you can use it to sacrifice another creature to gain life equal to that creature's toughness. That's the life gain that we're looking for, but also we can weaponize the life gain, weaponize these creatures, and really turn this deck into a powerful synergistic engine that doesn't need its commanders, instead it supports its commanders. I also think a no-brainer in this category has to be Blood Artist and Zulaport Cutthroat, allowing us to gain tons of advantage as we sacrifice all of the other minions. Let's look at a few more cards that'll gain us life on our opponent's turns. Sunscorch Regent can be a huge flying beating threat on its own, but also that incidental life gain is really cool. Knights of the Black Rose is great. We're going to have tons of tokens to block. We're going to have the ability to attack really well, so the Monarch seems really good for us. And if we ever pass the Monarch off, we're going to be draining our opponents during their turn, triggering this life gain that we really want. And then Kambal, Council of Allocation, another legendary creature, having us drain our opponents on their turn, allowing us to get these life gain triggers. I mentioned a few payoffs for life gain, but one thing that synergizes so well with life gain and tokens is Archangel of Thune. The ability to pump the token army to be relevant is over the top great, and if we're gaining small chunks of life on every single turn, we're just going to get out of control. It's such a powerful card. And something that feels a little bit like Archangel of Thune is Angel of Invention. It has lifelink itself, it can put bodies on the board, and it's an anthem, making our tokens a little bit more relevant, really strong. And if we want to embrace an artifact strategy a little bit more, Marionette Master is very, very strong. If we can ever pump Marionette Master's power and utilize the sacrifice outlets we have to get rid of artifacts, yeah, we just take out a game. It's crazy. As I mentioned artifacts, there's some artifacts and enchantments that support this theme really well. Let's explore some of them. Trading Post, the Planeswalker of Artifacts, lets you gain life. It creates stupid tokens you can sacrifice. It's also a sacrifice outlet. It synergizes with artifacts. Man, it's just great. Other artifacts that go really well in this strategy, Umezawa's Jite, just a powerful card in general, but can let you gain life on opponents' turns and save it up. So just imagine if you have a ton of counters on Jite, and then you finally get a chance to play your commander, and then at the end of each opponent's turn, you're like, yep, gain 2 life, gain 2 life, gain 2 life, gain 2 life. And what you're really doing is gaining 2 warriors, gaining 2 warriors, gaining 2 warriors, gaining 2 warriors. Oh, I love Jite. It's like this little army creator. Oh, so good. Pristine Talisman is ramp and life gain. So good. By the way, we are going to need a ton of ramp in this deck. Black-white isn't the best at it, so we might need to rely on artifacts for a lot of our ramp. Druidic Satchel. Life gain and green Sapperling tokens. Let's just make sure to have every type of token possible in this deck. That seems to match really well. But also, you can do this on your opponent's turn too, so you can gain life on your opponent's turn, and if you miss, then you still get a Sapperling token. It really enables the strategy. And then one thing that also gains us life on every single turn is Sun Droplet. Sun Droplet is funny and annoying and just great. It's a 2-drop artifact, and whenever you're dealt damage, you put that many counters on Sun Droplet, and at the beginning of each upkeep, you take a counter off and you gain a life. This is great for gaining life on your opponent's turns and being generally annoying. Also, Darien matches really well with this strategy because if we're accepting damage, we can then put soldiers onto the battlefield. So Sun Droplet and Darien could be best friends as we just deal damage to ourselves, or we take damage in and then we gain it back and put tokens onto the battlefield. It's a really fun strategy. But there are other artifacts that support life gain: Whip of Erebos, Aetherflux Reservoir, Well of Lost Dreams. I think Well of Lost Dreams is particularly important because we've noticed a lot of ways to gain life, but not as many ways to weaponize it. And the Reservoir is great for just blasting people out of the game. Well of Lost Dreams is great for gaining value off of that life gain. Finally, we have a series of cards that work so well because they cost us so little. High Market and Mirren, sacrifice creatures to gain life, exactly what we want to do at instant speed, are on untapped lands. Perfect. Orzhov, Church of the Deals, is a lot to activate, but it still comes into the battlefield untapped. Westvale Abbey produces creatures that we can just throw away, and it's going to be super easy to flip over because we're going to have a ton of disposable creatures in this deck. And Springjack Pasture creates goats. Okay, it also lets you sacrifice those goats to get mana and gain life. It's exactly what we want. I've talked about artifacts and lands, but now let's talk about enchantments, because black-white enchantments are great, and they do a lot of draining and a lot of control, and that could go really well in this deck. Polluted Bonds. Amazing card. Whenever a land comes into play under an opponent's control, that player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. There was a game where I had 2 Polluted Bonds out and someone else copied another one of my Polluted Bonds, and people just couldn't play lands. It was amazing. For me, it was amazing. For everyone else, they were miserable and attacked me a bunch. Okay, Blind Obedience, again, slows down the game, but gives us Extort, giving us tons of draining value over the course of many turns. Other cards that gain life: Authority of the Consuls, Ashes of the Abhorrent, Blood Chief Ascension. All of these are enchantments that help control the game. We can deploy them early. Yeah. And if we really want to be, I don't know, fill in your own adjective. We could play Exquisite Blood and Sanguine Bond. They actually match really well in this deck. Some people are not gonna like their inclusion together, but I play them in decks and I'm not a horrible person. You know, black-white enchantment seems like it matches really well, and we have a commander that supports that, Daxos the Returned. Look at this, another legendary Orzhov creature. This matches so well. And Daxos the Return can make creatures, but also Mobilization, Necromancer's Covenant, both those can put creatures onto the battlefield as well. This means that we could have an enchantment-themed Krav and Regna deck, or we could have Krav and Regna in maybe a token-themed Daxos deck. I'm just trying to give you lots and lots of different options. And of course, if I'm going to give you lots of different options, why not consider Lich's Mastery? This legendary enchantment says you can't lose the game. Whenever you gain life, you draw cards. Whenever you lose life, then you basically have to exile a permanent you control or a card from your hand or graveyard. Wait a second. This deck is all about life gain. We gain tons of life, so we would draw tons of cards. If people deal damage to us, then we have to sacrifice permanents. What's a good permanent to sacrifice? I don't know. A crappy soldier, a goat token. We're gonna have tons of those. And then Lich's Mastery can help us overcome and win in some fantastic fashion, which I haven't thought of yet, but we will. We will think of it. We could also play the other Liches, Original Lich, Nefarious Lich. This could be an Enchantress Lich deck. We could even fetch it up with some of the great tutors in black and white. Is this the best version of the deck? Probably not, but is it amazing? Oh yes, it is. So what do we think about Krav and Regna? Well, together they work really well. I know they're going to go so well in so many different decks. That card draw in Krav is insane. The creature creation on Regna can be really strong, especially if we support it with life gain strategies. And if we want to build our own deck, well, Orzhov has us covered. We can look at so many other Orzhov generals and incorporate some of their creature token, their life gain, their drain strategies all together to make something really strong and really powerful. And if we want to go off the deep end, we can always play a little bit of an enchantment theme and maybe go a little bit deep on Lich's Mastery. I want to thank TCGplayer.com for sponsoring this video and the entire Jumbo Commander channel. Thank you, TCGplayer.com. Check out the link to the deck list in the description where you can see how I would build this crazy deck. And you can check out TCGplayer.com just to buy a bunch of awesome Battlebond cards. I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons. Thank you, patrons. You are all so awesome. I have wonderful rewards coming right towards you very soon. And if you liked this video and want to see more, make sure you subscribe to my channel, hit that bell icon. And I can't wait to share with you even more deck techs that I'm brewing and play against you at GP Las Vegas.